Awesome. Let me know if I've got any issues with my audio that pop up, and I should be able to fix it. But apart from that, we'll get started here. We've got 4 classes to go through tonight. Starting off with 405.04, stability. Captain Towers, and this should be 40 minutes long. Teaching points that we're going to be going over, we're going to describe stability. We're going to talk about longitudinal stability, lateral stability, and directional stability. This class will cover the different types of stability and ways each can be attained or enhanced. Understanding the stability of aircraft will help you understand more about how to keep the aircraft stable during flight and understand why different design characteristics are used when building aircraft. That's why stability is important to understand. So to start off, we'll do a review of the axes of an aircraft. So can anyone tell me what the 3 axes are and what movements they control or are connected to? Vertical is yaw from Cameron. Book, can you tell me another one?
There is a longitudinal roll, which is done by your elevators, or longitudinal roll, which is a roll.
Yeah, and that's done with your ailerons. And then we have lateral, which is pitch. And the lateral one goes through wingtip to wingtip. Okay. Right off the bat, we'll go into some definitions of stability as it relates to aviation. So these definitions, you'll probably see a couple questions on them on the test, so make sure you pay attention. First off, we have stability, which is the tendency of an aircraft in flight to remain straight, level, upright, otherwise known as the normal flight attitude, and to return to this attitude if displaced without corrective action by the pilot. So that's what stability is defined as. Inherent stability is due to aircraft design features. The aircraft may overall be considered stable as long as it's within the prescribed center of gravity for that aircraft. Next up, we have static and dynamic stability. So static stability is the initial tendency of an aircraft when disturbed to return to the original position. And dynamic stability is the overall tendency of an aircraft to return to its position following a series of dampened out oscillations. Then we have positive, negative, and neutral. So positive stability means that once displaced, the aircraft will develop forces or movements which tend to restore it to its original position. Negative is once displaced, the aircraft will develop forces or movements which tend to move it further away from its original position. It's sometimes referred to as instability. And neutral stability is once displaced, the aircraft will neither return to its original position nor move further away. So can anyone name off some examples of when you might want to have positive stability and when you might want to have negative and when you might want to have neutral? Any ideas? Zographos?
One example might be through rough meteorological conditions, such as like vertical winds.
So these
For
definitions of
positive.
stability are more so tied to the design of the aircraft itself. So when might you want to design an aircraft to have positive stability versus negative versus neutral? What purposes might you use each aircraft type for?
Oh, can I go again or?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, so for positive might be some cargo aircraft, since you don't really want that tumbling around.
Hmm.
Neutral might be for like the extra 300, some aerobatic stuff.
Yeah,
And negative might be for like better maneuverability, such as F-16s.
exactly. You got it bang on. Positive, we want trainer aircraft, gliders, passenger aircraft, cargo aircraft, all that sort of stuff. Good to have positive stability. Negative fighters, for sure. You want that maneuverability. You want your negative stability. And neutral, like you said, the aerobatics, the extra 300, the show aircraft. And when you put it somewhere, you want it to stay where it's been put. Perfect. You guys are nailing it pretty good. So now we'll get into the three stability, like axis stabilities. So there's longitudinal is the first one. So it's stability around the lateral axis. It's also known as pitch stability. Most aircraft are designed to be nose heavy because if an engine were to fail, it would assume a normal glide attitude. So longitudinal stability is stability around the lateral axis. There's two factors that affect longitudinal stability, and those are the size and position of the horizontal stabilizer and the center of gravity. So when it comes to the horizontal stabilizer, the further back the horizontal stabilizer is, the more leverage it has on the aircraft. So that's also known as the moment arm. When the aircraft pitches up, the horizontal stabilizer will meet the air at a greater angle of attack, where more lift is produced, bringing the tail back up and restoring balance. And then the center of gravity is the other main factor that affects longitudinal stability. And if the center of gravity is too far aft, it results in nose-high attitude, which makes it difficult to control the aircraft. If the aircraft stalls with a center of gravity that's too far aft, stall and spin recovery may be prevented by the difficulty in raising the nose. And if the center of gravity is too far forward, the aircraft will easily recover from a stall, but may have difficulty with maintaining level flight. So I have with me today a little mini aircraft model. So we'll try and see if we can use it at some point. It's not really great proportions, but we'll do what we can. So basically, when it comes to the CFG, if we've got our weight too far back, we're going to be nose high all the time. And that's going to make it difficult to control the aircraft. Now, if you stall the aircraft at this point, you might not be able to, we'll talk about it later tonight, but the recovery from a stall, you need to regain, you need to let the nose drop and regain control, regain airflow over your flight surfaces. But if your CFG is too far aft, you're going to be stuck like this, and that could put you into a flat spin or just a flat stall and boom, crash, right? So you always want to have your center of gravity in the right limits for your aircraft. And then with your CFG being too far forward, well, that's great. You're probably not going to stall, but it's going to be hard for you to keep picking up your nose to maintain level flight, and you'll be more so trying to fly towards the ground. So the two factors that affect the longitudinal stability is the size and position of the horizontal stabilizer and the center of gravity. Moving on to lateral stability. So lateral stability is stability around the longitudinal axis. It's also known as roll stability. So lateral stability, there's four factors that affect it. Number one is the dihedral, which is the angle that each wing makes with the horizontal. And when a wing drops, the low wing produces more lift, and the aircraft will tend to roll back to the proper position. So this little aircraft model has 0 degrees because it's just flat on. But if it's angled up as if it is on here, if you can imagine that it's rolling to starboard, this wing will drop. And now this wing is going to be producing more lift because it's going to be more in line with the airflow rather than this one, which is going to be angled way up here. And so because this one is producing more lift as the lower wing, that dihedral, this angle here being angled like that, is going to cause that aircraft to be self-correcting in that sense. The next factor that can affect lateral stability is sweepback. So that's when the leading edge of the wing slopes backwards. So you can see it slopes backwards like that. And this causes that when a wing drops, the low wing's leading edge meets the relative airflow at an angle that is perpendicular to the relative airflow, where lift is created and the wing rises back to the proper position. So in this example, I know it's a 2D image, but this example is viewed from the top, and the right wing there has lowered, and because of the sweep back, as it moves through the air straight, there's going to be more of this low wing that's hitting the air and getting more lift and causing it to self-correct. That makes sense to everyone? Awesome. Okay, so lateral stability, dihedral, sweep back, and then we have keel effect and proper weight distributions. So the keel effect is a natural feature of high wing aircraft, and because the center of the gravity of the aircraft is low compared to the wings, when the aircraft is disturbed and a wing drops, the aircraft kind of acts like a pendulum. So on this model, it's a low wing aircraft, but I'll flip it upside down and we'll pretend that it's now a high wing aircraft. And basically what happens is when one wing drops, all the weight is in the fuselage there, and it's going to want to swing it back like that. And that's why it's called the pendulum effect, because it kind of looks like the pendulum of a clock swinging back and forth. And that's one of the factors that can affect your lateral stability. And then proper weight distribution. So having the aircraft loaded improperly can cause a rolling motion. So if you have wing tank wing fuel tanks, and one wing is completely empty and the other one is completely full, what do you think that's going to do to your lateral stability? Any thoughts? Let's say I've got my plane here and I load the left wing full of fuel and I don't put anything in the right wing. What's going to happen to my little plane? Exactly. So your uneven weight distribution is going to affect your lateral stability. You're going to make sure that you're staying on top of that. Finally, we have directional stability. So we had longitudinal stability, we had lateral stability, now we have directional stability. Directional stability is stability around the vertical or normal axis. It's also known as yaw stability. Directional stability, the most important factor that affects this stability is the vertical tail surface. So that includes the fin or the vertical stabilizer and the rudder. And this is basically if the aircraft yaws away from the intended direction, the air hits the vertical stabilizer and pushes the aircraft back towards its intended line of flight. So if you imagine you're flying along here and then you're turning this way, all of a sudden the air that you were moving forward is going to push your tail like a sail basically and force you back into alignment. And so that's your directional stability. That's why the most important factor that affects your directional stability is your vertical tail surface. Keel effect and sweepback can also contribute to directional stability, but the most important one is that vertical tail surface. All right. So question number 1, what are the 4 factors that affect lateral stability? Dudzinski.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, so the 4 factors are there's dihedral stability, there is sweepback stability, the keel effect, and proper weight distribution.
That is correct. When it comes to the 4 factors, it's not dihedral stability and sweepback stability, it's just dihedral and sweepback. Because dihedral means the angle that the wings meet the horizontal, and sweepback means the angle that the wings are like swept back. But bang on.
Okay, thank you. I'll remember that.
No problem. We're just flying through this one. Confirmation number 2. What is the difference between dynamic and positive stability? Brinkhurst. Cadet Brinkhurst. Can you tell me what the difference between dynamic and positive stability is? I'm moving too fast for you then. Can anyone help them out? Zographos?
Wouldn't positive be the initial tendency and dynamic the overall?
That's exactly it. Bang on. So I can jump back to that slide so that Brinkhurst can get it down. Does anyone else need to write this down? And were there any other slides that you wanted me to hop back? We're scheduled for 40 minutes for each class, but if I don't see any reactions or feedback from you guys, then I tend to move a bit quick. So we're only 16 minutes in. Okay, given 5 more seconds to say you want to stay on the slide or go to another one. Why was it called positive stability and not static? So static stability is the initial tendency, whereas positive stability refers to the fact that the aircraft will develop forces or movements which tend to restore it to a position, its original position. So it's basically the fact that it will cause something to happen that's going to move it back towards its initial position. So static is, I can see where you would see some similarity between the two. But I would say the difference is probably closer to this positive stability is just like the very first movement that it could make, whereas static is a categorization of saying that it's the not explaining this great, but it's going to overall try to get back to its original position, and then or not overall, but basically there's a lot of different ways of categorizing stability, if that makes sense. So it's depending on what you're looking at as to what category it's going to fall into. Is that okay? Perfect. A/C generally refers to aircraft. So under pitch stability, are we done on this slide? Okay. Yeah, so if the aircraft stalls with a center of gravity too far aft, so a stall is it'll be one of the future lessons here. I'm going to write this stuff down for feedback though. As soon as I find my notes, there we go. Okay, so feedback. Reference made to stalls before we talked about it. And okay. So does that make sense, Cameron? That if the aircraft stalls, basically a stall is when the wing stops producing lift. Perfect. Any other questions or any other slides that we wanted to revisit before we carry on with the confirmation questions? Going once, going twice. All right, back to confirmation questions. Okay, confirmation number 3. What are the 2 factors that affect longitudinal stability? Kim, do you want to answer that? Bang on. The size and position of the horizontal stabilizer and the center of gravity position are the 2 factors that affect the longitudinal stability. Okay, this thought I had. Yes, I did. Okay, so that concludes the class. We talked about stability, talked about longitudinal stability, lateral stability, and directional stability. I did grab the self-study quiz so that we could go over it together here. Let's see. Where did it go? Okay, here it is. So I'll just ask those questions. And so we blaze through that class. Oh, they're all multiple choice. This is going to be challenging to ask over Teams. Okay, I'll just pick the 2 hardest ones, the 2 closest ones. Oh, they're so sneaky about it, though. All right. When it comes to the stealth study guide, do you guys just want to look at those yourselves? Or if we have extra time, do you want me to read through them and try and trick you guys up in the class itself? We have any preferences? I'm fine with not reading them, and we can just move on to the next class early. The study guides are in the folder, and let me see if I can find that for you. So a million different windows open. Okay. Oh, it's not that one. Okay, here we go. So in there, there's a folder for each lesson, and most of them, but not all of them, it can sometimes take a little bit for it to get uploaded, but most of them will have the folder for the lesson, and then it will have a topic list, lesson plan, presentation, a quiz PDF, and a quiz URL. And then all the same things in French. Just to show you what it looks like here. So for this class, it would be stability, and then quiz. And then the answer keys at the back. Any questions about the quiz? All right. Do you guys want a 5-minute break before we hop into the next one, or do you want to just start the next one? Great. No break. We'll just power through. Awesome. Okay, so close this and open up the next one. 40505 stalls. Okay, it says that it should take 40 minutes. We'll see if it does or not, and we'll get started. This lesson is 405.05, stalls. Our teaching points we're going to go over, we're going to review lift, describe the theory of a stall, describe stall symptoms and characteristics, describe the stall speed factors, and describe the theory of a spin. At the end of the class, students shall be able to describe what is occurring aerodynamically before, during, and after a stall, while also understanding the basic spin theory. Pilots must recognize the symptoms of an approaching stall and how to recover from one with minimum altitude lost. All right, reviewing lift. Well, you guys have talked about this in previous theory of flight classes, I'm sure. But lift and drag vary with the angle of attack. So just for a refresher for everyone, the angle of attack is the angle that the wing or the chord line of the wing makes with the relative airflow. So if the air is coming like this, the angle of attack is going to be the angle that that wing, that chord line makes with the relative airflow. As lift increases, drag also increases. So you always have to try to find the best compromise between the two. When we're talking about airflow over a wing, there's three definitions here. There's the laminar flow, which is the smooth layer of air nearest the wing. And then there's the transition point, which is the point where the boundary air layer starts to separate from the airfoil. And the boundary layer is just the air that's immediately attached to the airfoil. And then the separation point is the point at which the air is no longer flowing over the wing. So if we go back to these definitions, we have laminar flow, transition, and separation. And this diagram isn't great at distinguishing between the two, but we'll just go into the theory of a stall. So a stall at its most basic, it's just when the wing cannot produce lift to counteract the weight of the aircraft and the aircraft no longer flies. So as you increase your angle of attack up to the point of the stall, the angle of attack is going to increase. The laminar flow, as the angle of attack increases, is going to start to separate, and the transition point is going to start moving forwards along the wing. The flow of air over the wing becomes disturbed, and the air cannot follow the camber, which is the upper curve of the airfoil. The airflow separates from the wing and the air becomes turbulent. So at the point at which that happens is called the critical angle of attack. So something that might come up is you'll often hear stall speeds with relation to flying, but what's actually happening is you're reaching your critical angle of attack. So an aircraft can technically stall at any speed if the critical angle of attack is exceeded. But for most of the aircraft that you'd fly, especially like gliders and whatnot, if you just pay attention to your speeds, you're probably going to be fine. But fancier aircraft like jets or like fighter jets and perhaps big passenger aircraft, and if you're really wealthy, the Icon A5, which is a fun little amphibious aircraft, will have an angle of attack sensor, and it will show you exactly when you're going to stall based off of that instead of just your speed, which is kind of neat. But overall, this is the general theory of the stall, is that when the wing cannot produce lift to counteract the weight of the aircraft, and that's caused because of the critical angle of attack being exceeded. So when we're talking about the center of pressure, as the angle of attack increases, the center of pressure is going to move forward on the wing. So as your angle of attack increases, imagine my finger is the center of pressure, it's moving forwards. And then at the point of the stall, the center of pressure will be moving rapidly back towards the trailing edge of the wing, which as you can see here, I'm going up, I'm going up, I'm going up. It's moving forward. Oh, I reached the point of stall, and it's moving backwards, diving down and moving backwards all at the same time. Getting into symptoms of a stall. So first up, if you've got nose-high attitude with low airspeed, this is most noticeable when about to stall from a straight glide attitude. You'll often suddenly hear it go a lot quieter. There'll be a lot less wind noise. If your controls feel sloppy, so the effectiveness of the ailerons decreases as the airspeed decreases due to the lack of airflow over the surfaces. And if you're making large movements of the control column, you'll find that they're not effective when you're stalled. Buffeting. So the glider will start to shake. The aircraft will start to shake because of that turbulent airflow hitting the aircraft and moving it around. So those are the symptoms of a stall. Nose-high attitude with low airspeed, sloppy controls, and buffeting. Some characteristics of the stall. You've got your mushy controls. You've got a sinking sensation, like you're on a really fast elevator that's going down, because you are. You're going down really fast. You have a high rate of descent, and your wing and or your nose might drop. So you're just flying around, you've exceeded your critical angle of attack, you're stalling, and you're plummeting downwards. And as you're plummeting downwards, that's what makes you feel like you're sinking, because you're getting lifted up inside of the aircraft as the aircraft falls down around you. So, some more characteristics of a stall. A stall means that the aircraft has ceased to fly and is now falling due to gravity. Pulling the control column back will not have any effect. To recover from a stall, it's only possible by moving the control column forward, which will lower the nose, which will increase the amount of air moving over the wings, which will create enough lift to return the aircraft to flight. So if you're losing altitude, normally your instinct is to pull up to avoid hitting the ground, But if you're in a stall, you're not actually going to get any altitude from pulling up. You're just going to worsen the stall. And you need to make sure that you let that nose get back down so you can get your speed back up and fly again. So some factors that influence this stall speed. There's a fair amount of them, so we'll just go through them. So weight. When weight is added to the aircraft, more angle of attack is needed to produce enough lift to counteract the additional weight. The critical angle of attack will stay the same, but is reached at a higher airspeed. As weight increases, so does the stall speed. And then when it comes to the center of gravity, as the center of gravity moves forward, the stall speed will increase. If the center of gravity moves outside the designated allowable center of gravity range, the stability is negatively affected. So to give you a little personal anecdote, I once flew a glider where the estimates provided by the pilot and the passenger for their weights were, let's say, less than accurate. And let me tell you, it was noticeable that we were no longer inside of the limits for the weight of the aircraft. And so I had to fly that flight going 60 to 65 miles an hour throughout the entire flight, despite the fact that normally you would be flying 50 miles an hour in the glider, just to make sure that I didn't stall the aircraft. So weight is very important when it comes to flying. Some more factors that affects stalls or the stall speed. If you have turbulence, so an upward vertical gust can cause an increase in the angle of attack, and turbulence can result in a stall if the airspeed of that aircraft is low. So if you're thinking about turbulence here, you're flying along, your relative airflow is like this, right, as you're flying. If you suddenly have turbulence, that becomes not your airflow going like this, but your airflow going like this. And let me tell you, that is a very high angle of attack if your airflow is like this, right? So if you have turbulence, you can suddenly stall even if you were flying perfectly fast before, because your wing has exceeded that critical angle of attack. Another thing that will affect your stall speed is turns. Now, an increase in the angle of bank requires more lift due to the increase of the load factor from being in that turn. And because lift always acts 90 degrees to the wingspan, in a turn, lift is not going to be acting straight up, but more up and to the side. As the angle of bank increases, the amount of lift required to sustain flight increases. So to produce enough lift in that situation, the pilot must increase the angle of attack, therefore reaching the critical angle of attack, so the stall angle, at a higher airspeed. And the next set of factors that impact the stall speed are flaps and weather conditions, so snow, ice, frost, and heavy rain. So flaps are pretty nifty. They decrease the stall speed by increasing the lift that you can get out of your wing due to increasing the camber of the wing, which, as we talked about, is that curvature of the upper surface. Snow, ice, frost, and heavy rain contribute to changing your stall speed by accumulating on the aircraft and interfering with the laminar airflow and boundary layer, which decreases the lift and increases the stall speed. Any questions about stalls, stall speed factors, stall speed characteristics before I move on to spins? All right. Back to the symptoms slide, sure. Have you guys been able to access the PowerPoints after the lessons finish? You need another 10 seconds, Cameron? All right. Any other final questions about stalls before we move on to spins? Okay, so spins. A spin is an auto rotation that develops after an aggravated stall. An aircraft cannot spin if the aircraft has not stalled first. When a wing is stalled, an attempt to increase the angle of attack will increase the induced drag, which will further decrease lift. The low wing will have a greater angle of attack to the relative airflow and will receive less lift and will drop more rapidly. Increasing the angle of attack will further stall the wing. The nose will then drop and the auto rotation starts. So if you've got your plane here, you're lifting up, you stall, your one wing drops, you try and pick it up by pulling back on the stick, you're pulling back, it's dropping more, and you're in a spin. I'm not sure if it's this class or the next one, or even the one after that, but there will be a YouTube video that goes over spins and stalls and provides nice visualizations and whatnot, so we can review that when we get to it. So, confirmation question number 1. What are the factors that affect stall speed? Long, anything from you?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
So some factors: your weight, your center of gravity, turbulence, turns, flaps, different weather conditions like snow, ice, frost, heavy rain, and yeah.
Perfect. You nailed them all. What are the 3 factors that signal the approach of a stall? Let's go with Cadet Price. Nope, we don't have hear anything. You are muted, Price, so maybe that's it. There you go. We heard you a little bit, but no voice. Just a little burst of like fan noise or something. That's fine. Looks like your fellow classmates have chimed in. All good. Maybe give it a test before your next class and see if you can get it figured out. But yes, the 3 factors are going to be the sloppy controls, the buffeting, the nose high with low airspeed. Those are definitely the main symptoms that you're going to see, is that nose high attitude, the sloppy controls, and the buffeting. Confirmation question number 3. Can anyone tell me what happens during a stall to the airflow on the wing and like the center of pressure? Let's go with Concorin. So the airflow stops and the wing stops producing lift. Yeah, so as you approach that point of stall, your center of pressure is moving forward. You reach the point of stall and your center of pressure is going to be moving rapidly back towards the trailing edge of the wing, and you're going to have all that turbulent airflow and no more lift. As the angle of attack increases, the airflow from the top and bottom of the wing separates, making a turbulent area behind the wing, killing the lift that the wing produces. Exactly. Bang on, guys. Confirmation question number 4. What causes a spin? Dudzinski.
An aggravated stall. So like after you stall, I believe one of the wings starts dropping, which in turn, and then if you try to like pull back on your stick to try and fix it, since you don't have any lift, it won't do anything, and then the wing will continue dropping, and your angle of attack will stay very high because you're trying to lift it, and eventually it'll get so high that your nose will just drop and you'll just start going down in a spiral.
Well, it's important to note there's a distinction between a spiral dive and a spin, but yes, a spin looks like a spiral. Exactly. All right, perfect. Another class breezed through in 20 minutes. Before we move on, is there any slides that you guys want me to go back and review again or pause on to get you guys to write down some more notes? Hook.
I have a quick question. Would a incipient spin also be considered as a stall?
Yeah, we'll go over the incipient spins in not this next class, but the one after it. But basically, an incipient spin is just the start of a spin. So it kind of goes like stall, incipient spin, developing spin, full spin. Is kind of the order of it.
Okay, thank you.
So a stall can lead to an incipient spin. Yeah. All right. Any other slides? Any other questions from the class before we move on? Okay, so this one is 4:05:06. Those last two classes said that they were 40 minutes. They both took 20 minutes. We'll see how long this one takes, and we'll go from there. This one is talking about secondary control and effects. So students should have a working knowledge of some of the secondary controls and how they affect the aircraft. As pilots, you must have a solid understanding of your controls and how they are used. This information will enable you to pilot different types of the aircraft better, enabling you as a pilot to have a more relaxing and smoother flight. You may have to rely on this information during an unexpected emergency. So we're going to talk about trim use. We're going to talk about spoilers and dive brakes. I'm not sure dive brakes spelled correctly there. Pretty sure it's not. But I will do that. Live feedback. NTP slide. Brakes instead of dive brakes. I don't know you guys, but that stuff just bothers me. Missed it on my review of the PowerPoint. Okay, so trim use, spoilers and dive brakes, flaps and their functionality, and we're going to talk about the secondary effects of controls and the coordination associated with them. So first up, stick trim. So stick trim uses a series of bungees or springs to maintain the control column in a particular location. Stick trim alleviates the pressure that the pilot requires on the controls. Elevator trim helps maintain a desired attitude and therefore your airspeed. And the more points that you have on your trim means the more it is, or that it is more accurate in holding your desired attitude. So when you're in the cockpit, trimming forward means that you're going to be holding a higher airspeed, as the aircraft is going to be trimmed more like this. And trimmed aft is just holding a lower airspeed. So you can basically think of trim as your cruise control for your attitude in your aircraft. And here I have two pictures / videos. So right here is a picture from the cockpit of an older glider where we had a stick or a trim system using bungees, which is this lever right here. And basically under here was a bunch of bungees that connected this rod to the control column there. And you had 3 notches. So you had 3 settings for your trim. And that's basically all you could do. This second trim system that I've got here, it's from a glider that was in the middle of being serviced. So you can actually see the internal workings of what's going on when you have a stick trim, which is a ratcheting trim system, where you've got the trim control knob right next to the stick in the front seat of the glider. So basically this works. It gives you 3 notches via bungee system, and then we'll watch a video on how this works for the ratcheting trim system. You can see the ratchet part is just connected to the control column. And what you're doing is you're just changing where the control column is situated with that ratcheting point as it moves back and forth, control the elevator. So if you've trimmed all the way forward, now it's going to keep the control column forward. Just a second here. My computer is being fancy and making my screen red. There we go. Okay. Any questions about this video? One thing that I'd like to point out is you can see that as I'm moving it around, I'm pulling the knob. Yeah, it's just the red filter is just for me, but it was distracting me, so I just had to turn off. Anyways, you can see as I'm pulling the knob, I first pull the knob and then move it to where I want to set it and let it go. When you're actually in the glider, the way that you actually set it is you just move the stick to the position you want it to hold, and then you pull the knob, and it just snaps into place for where it's going to be held. And that's just how you set your video of this. Any thoughts, questions on this video? Anyone think it's cool? I took that video in 2017, so 7 years ago, and I finally had a use for it today. So hopefully you guys found it interesting. How often are you going to see the glider completely torn apart like that? Couldn't miss it. Excellent. All right. Any questions about the stick trim before we move on? Key thing about the stick trim, it's basically just a cruise control for your attitude. All right, next up, in addition to the stick trim, you can also have a trim tab. So the stick trim was something that was going on inside of the cockpit, while the trim tab is something that's on your flight control surfaces that happens outside, like actually on the control surfaces itself. And it can be controlled either manually, or like when you're on the ground, you could bend it, or it can be controlled by a system inside the cockpit. But the actual physical changes are happening on the outside of the aircraft on the trailing edge of a control surface. So here you can see there's some rudder trim on this rudder, which is a trim tab right there, and another trim tab on the elevator itself. Again, dive brakes spell wrong. So, side for spoilers. Excellent question. Have you seen elevator trim tabs on only one of the two elevators? Why would that be? Wouldn't it cause roll? It wouldn't cause roll because it's such like if you think about your ailerons, where are your ailerons located on the wing? Are they on the inside of the wing or the outside of the wing? Your ailerons are going to be located on the outside of the wing, right? That's because they're a relatively small piece of your flight surface, and in order to get it to actually impact the roll, it needs to have the greatest arm that it can to actually impact that. It needs to have leverage to turn the aircraft like that. So the trim tab, when it's all the way like right close to the fuselage of the aircraft, isn't going to actually cause roll because there's not enough force there. And like Zografos, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher everybody's names, said there is stuff like prop wash, which is usually coming around there too. But ultimately, I don't have a diagram for it here, so I will add that diagram of how a trim tab works would be beneficial. But basically what the trim tab is doing is it's just providing a little bit of force, which then pushes the control surface in the opposite direction. So here, if the trim tab is deflected upwards, that means that the elevator is going to be deflected downwards, which means that this always confuses me. The aircraft will be going up. So the trim tab's only purpose is basically to move the control surface itself. It's simply not big enough to actually impact the aircraft itself. Does that kind of make sense? Perfect. Just getting sidetracked because it appears the landing gear on my aircraft is slightly bent. So just perform some quick maintenance on it so I can use it as a fidget spinner. All right. Now we get into spoilers and dive brakes. So the glider that we have has both spoilers and dive brakes, but they are two separate things. So spoilers are on the top of the wing, and the purpose of them is to disrupt the laminar airflow over the wing, which is going to decrease your lift. Dive brakes, on the other hand, are on under the wing. I'm also going to add a note here because I am positive that we can get some better pictures in this. Pictures of spoilers and dive brakes from a glider. Okay, so spoilers, they disrupt the lift, they spoil the lift, and dive brakes disrupt the airflow under the wing and increase the drag. Hence why they're called dive brake. Like it's like a brake. Exactly, Dennis. We were talking about the trim tabs. Any questions about the spoilers and the dive brakes here? Oh, here's a better picture. So these are the dive brakes on the bottom of glider. If the lesson ends early, I'll take a look in my photo library to see if I've got a better picture of the spoilers and dive brakes. But when you deploy the spoilers and the dive brakes, it's going to increase the stall speed and increase the drag. And utilizing dive brakes and spoilers allow pilots to control their rate of descent and descent angle upon final approach and landing. So instead of going, I'm too high, I need to lose more altitude before I get down, and going, oh, maybe I should point at the ground. Well, that's going to increase your airspeed, and by the time you get to the ground, you're just going to be rolling forever. So if you use your spoilers and dive brakes, you can spoil your lift, you can increase your drag, slow yourself down, and descend at a rate that you want to have a more controlled descent. So that's the purpose of spoilers and dive brakes. Very important pieces in a glider's arsenal. Okay, next up, flaps. So flaps are found on the trailing edge of the wing. You can see right here, we've got the wing, and then we've got the ailerons right here, and these are the flaps. So they are used to minimize the need of increasing the angle of attack to maintain lift at slow speeds. So lowering the flaps increases the camber, which is that curvature of the wing, which allows the aircraft to fly at a slower airspeed. So flaps are lowered so that the front section of the wing still meets the air at the same angle, but the overall angle of attack changes because of the extension of the camber of the wing. So flaps, when you deploy the flaps, it decreases the stall speed due to the increased camber of the wing. And retracting the flaps increases the stall speed due to the decreased camber of the wing. So flaps effectively increase the area of the wing. So if you're thermaling a glider and you are lucky enough to have flaps on your glider, you could use your flaps. You could deploy your flaps to increase the area of the wing to get more lift, and to be able to fly slower, to stay in the thermal for longer. So it can be helpful to thermal with flaps deployed. But if you're going to be traveling to a new thermal, you want to make sure that you close up those flaps so that you can fly most efficiently to the next thermal. And Cameron, are you asking me to go back to the previous flaps slide? This one? Okay. I'll give you like 20 seconds to copy that down. Any other questions about flaps before we carry on? All right, Cameron, you got it? Excellent. So flaps, you're going to want to use them for a takeoff, which allows you to have a better angle of climb, a slower takeoff speed, and you have increased visibility, because when you're taking off, normally you have to have your nose high to have that higher angle of attack, which means that you can't really see over your nose, which means you don't know what's in front of you. But if you have your flaps deployed, then for the same amount of lift, you can have a lower angle of attack and have better visibility as you climb out, while still getting that same lift you need to go up. When it comes to approach and landing, the flaps allow a slower approach speed and reduces the stall speed, providing more room for error as you approach the ground, which is very important. It again significantly improves your visibility and allows for a steeper approach. So instead of having to have your normal approach go like this to maintain your rate of descent while maintaining your airspeed, you can afford to have your nose a little bit further down because your flaps are taking care of that rate of descent for you and allows you to have a steeper approach. All right, now we'll get into the secondary effects of control. Yes, your stall speed is still lower with full 40 degrees of flaps. So your stall speed will basically always be lower with your flaps deployed. And that's indicated on your airspeed indicator. Typically there will be a green arc on your airspeed indicator, with the bottom of the green arc being just above your stall speed or your stall speed. And then there'll be a secondary white arc, which will be below the bottom of your green arc, and that will indicate your stall speed with the flaps deployed. And the top of the white arc will also be lower than the top of the green arc, because you don't want to be flying at your full speed with your flaps deployed. Okay, secondary effects of control. Has anyone heard the term adverse yaw before? The fun little thing that you can do lots with as a pilot. So basically, in a turn, if you're just using your ailerons to turn, adverse yaw will be produced due to induced drag created by the downgoing aileron, which will cause the nose of the aircraft to yaw in the opposite direction of the turn. So I really wish I had that fancy Scout model, with the moving ailerons. But basically, if we're turning to the left and we're not using our rudder at all, we've got the left aileron pointing up and the right aileron pointing down, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. This always confuses me. But basically, the downgoing aileron is going to be causing more drag. So the aircraft is going to yaw in the direction opposite the turn. And that's adverse yaw. So if you move the control column to the right, the left aileron deflects down, yep, and the nose will initially yaw to the left. After a couple of seconds, once the adverse yaw dissipates, the nose will yaw to the right in the direction of the turn. And you can prevent adverse yaw by coordinated use of the rudder. So when you start to learn to fly, you'll learn that to actually make a turn in an aircraft, you have to be using not just roll, but also yaw and pitch all at the same time to maintain a coordinated turn. Adverse yaw can increase the rate of descent. So in the next class, we'll talk about slips, where you can take advantage of adverse yaw and use it to control your altitude descent. So a key takeaway for you, though, is if you can't use your rudder for some reason, you can use the ailerons to perform a yawing motion. So for some reason, if your rudder is not functional, you could make advantage of the adverse yaw effect to make small corrections in your yaw by taking advantage of adverse yaw. Okay, another secondary effects of control. So when it comes to roll, in a turn, if rudders are used in isolation, they can produce roll. As the aircraft yaws, the outside wing moves through the air faster than the inside wing, which is moving slower. It moving faster is going to create more lift over the faster moving wing, which results in the aircraft rolling. And again, a takeaway from this is if you can't use your ailerons, the rudders can perform a rolling motion eventually. So if you're just using yaw, you can, like, say if you stomp on the left rudder here, hopefully that's not too confusing with the angle of the camera. But if I stomp on the left rudder here, I'm going to be swinging the nose like this, which is going to be causing the wingtip on the outside to be moving faster than the wingtip on the inside. And it's going to be causing this whole wing to be getting more lift, which is going to cause that rolling effect without having to use my ailerons at all. This is why you have to use all of your controls at once to maintain coordinated flight. Okay, confirmation question number 1. What does it mean when there is adverse yaw? What's going on? So if I start turning to the right by using just my ailerons, what's going to happen to my nose? Anyone? Jelano?
So if you are turning towards the right, and
Mhm.
you're only using your ailerons, wouldn't that mean the nose of your aircraft would veer to the left a little bit and then correct itself later?
Yep, exactly it. So adverse yaw is just the nose of the aircraft is going to be moving the opposite direction of the turn initially. Yeah, so Cameron, when you're turning to the right with just your ailerons, the first thing that happens is going to be your nose will actually move to the left because the downgoing aileron is going to be creating more drag on the left wing. Note that I say the downgoing aileron, not the downgoing wing. Are there any questions about adverse yaw? We can go further into it if you guys want. It can be a little bit confusing at first, but. Zographos, it's not necessarily that adverse yaw is undesired yaw effects. It's just not necessarily intuitive yaw effects. It's just describing what happens, not necessarily that it's undesired or not. Sometimes it could be desired, sometimes it could not be. Confirmation question number 2. How does having the trim fully forward affect the pilot? If I'm just flying along straight and level, and then I set my trim fully forward, what's going to happen? It'll increase your airspeed a lot. Well, yeah, because it'll start forcing your nose down. So it'll be easier to hold a higher airspeed. If you ever are flying a glider and you get rear seat rated and you go up, say you're a little bit of a larger guy like me, and you're in the rear seat and you get a brand new cadet who weighs like 90 pounds in the front seat and you don't take a ballast, oh boy, is it going to be hard to hold that nose of the glider down. So having trim could be extremely helpful in that case, because then you can just get them to push the trim forward all the way forward, and then you can have the aircraft help you push that nose forward. Confirmation question number 3. How do spoilers affect the flight? They disturb the airflow over the wing. Yep. What does it do to your stall speed? They spoil the lift by disrupting the laminar flow. Yep. Decreasing lift, exactly. What does deploying your spoilers do to your stall speed? Increases it, exactly. And it allows you to control the rate of descent. Confirmation number 4. What secondary effect occurs when you use just the rudder in a turn? So if you're turning and you're using just the rudder to do it, what secondary effect is going to happen? Yep, a little bit of roll. Perfect. So we talked about trim, spoilers and dive brakes, flaps and their function, and the secondary effects of controls and the coordination associated. All right, we'll get started here. 40507. Spins, spiral dives, and slips. My favorite maneuvers. Where is my, there we go. So, for this class, students should be able to describe what is happening to the aircraft to enter a spin and spiral dive, while also being aware of how to recover from those attitudes. Students should also understand the need for a slip when in flight and how to properly enter one. It's important because pilots must recognize the symptoms of an approaching spin, spiral dive, and slip, and understand the recovery for each to maintain the proper flight attitude for flight. So the teaching points we're going to go through, we're going to talk about the characteristics of a spin again, the recovery of a spin, the characteristics of a spiral dive, the recovery of a spiral dive, and the characteristics of a slip. So starting off with spins. So a spin, number 1, it's a stalled condition. It's specifically an auto rotation that develops after an aggravated stall. Usually you'll have a steep nose down attitude. You'll have a rolling motion about the longitudinal axis. So hard for me to demonstrate with my hands here, but importantly, in a spin, you're going to have a constant airspeed and it's going to be relatively low. And the load factor, so the G's, is going to be constant. And your descent rate is going to be constant. And it is that stalled condition. So when you guys go on course and you start practicing your spins and your spiral dives, you might find that in the glider, it's possible for a spin to turn into a spiral dive. And the way that you tell is you start your spin and your speed is relatively low, but all of a sudden your speed starts increasing. And now you're not in a spin. You're not stalled. You're in a spiral dive. And so that's why you need to make sure that you recover from those conditions quickly. And also why you need to make sure that you understand the difference between a spin and a spiral dive, because you don't want to be going up to do some spin practice and then just getting distracted with the, okay, we're going to do 2 full rotations before we recover, and then not notice that, whoop, I'm actually not in a spin anymore. I'm in a spiral dive, and I've just exceeded the velocity never exceed of the glider. And now we've got to ground the glider and have it maintenance look at it. So it's important to know the differences between a spin and a spiral dive and to understand the characteristics and how to recover from them. So again, characteristics of a spin: stalled condition, auto rotation, nose down, constant airspeed, low airspeed, and a low and constant load factor, and a constant descent rate. If your dials are spinning around, you're not in a spin because your speed should be constant in a spin. Characteristics of a spin. The primary cause of a spin is when one wing exceeds the critical angle of attack when in a turn with insufficient rudder control. An aircraft can only enter a spin when it is fully stalled. If one wing drops when an aircraft is approaching a stall, you should immediately lower the nose to reduce the angle of attack, and then you'll regain control of the aircraft. So an incipient spin, you start flying too slowly, the glider stalls, the left wing drops, you're starting to drop, but the pilot quickly corrects by dropping their nose and perhaps using a little bit of rudder and prevents that spin from developing. And then the glider recovers and re-enters normal flight. So as I talked about earlier, we were going to talk about the different types of spins. So first off, we have that incipient spin, the portion of the spin between the aircraft stalling and the rotation starting. So you've stalled and now you're starting to turn, but you haven't fully entered the spin yet. The fully developed spin, where the rotation begins, so now you're fully spinning, and then a flat spin, a very bad situation where you have level pitch and roll, but you're still spinning because you have no airflow over that wing, and now you're in a flat spin. It's very, very difficult to get out of a flat spin in a lot of aircraft. So you're going to end up spinning all the way down to the ground. No fun. Here's that video that we were talking about for the spin video. So I will take this and I will post it in the chat. You guys can take a look at that after we're done here. Oh, I don't want a full screen. I want to restart the PowerPoint. On to the spin recovery. So when it comes to spin recovery, always refer to your aircraft's operating manual for the specific spin recovery. Generally speaking, you can use the following approach, but the specifics can be different depending on the aircraft you're in. So it's very important that you know what those specifics are and that you have that procedure memorized for the aircraft that you're flying. But generally speaking, in order to recover from a spin, you want to apply full opposite rudder to stop that wing drop while centralizing the control column. Some older checklists might mention you should push the control column forward. You don't necessarily have to do that, especially not in the gliders that we fly. In the gliders that we fly, you basically just let go of the controls and it'll fix itself. But generally speaking, you want to apply that full opposite rudder so that you can pick up that wing, stop it from dropping, and then centralize the control column to regain your nose or slightly nose down attitude to regain your speed. When the rotation has stopped, so you're spinning, you're spinning, you're spinning, you're spinning, you stomp on the rudder, get that full opposite rudder to stop it from spinning. When that rotation is stopped, you can centralize the rudder at that point and then pull out of the dive and return to your level flight. Spiral dives. A spiral dive is a steep descending turn. You have excessively nose down altitude, an excessive angle of bank, excessive load factors, which get higher. So you start to feel like you're in a fighter jet because you're just pulling G's, rapidly increasing airspeed, rapidly increasing rate of descent, and the aircraft is not stalled. So generally what happens in a turn, you need to make sure that you're using roll and your yaw, but also pitch to pick up your nose, because as you turn, your nose will tend to drop. So you'll want to pick up your nose. What happens in a spiral dive, though, is you've turned too steep and you've let your nose drop. So now you can see with this angle that the aircraft is in, if I pull back on my elevator, or if I pull back on my control column to get my elevator to engage, to pick up my nose, well, I'm actually past the point where it's going to pick up my nose, and instead, all it's going to do is tighten my rate of turn. Now, it's not going to pick up the nose and stop me from descending. It's actually going to take it from this steep turn to this steeper turn and pull you back in a spiral towards the ground. And this is when you're starting to increase your speed. You're starting to feel that increased G-force, and this is a spiral dive. So in order to recover from that situation, you need to use coordinated control inputs to roll the wings level. So just pulling back on your stick, that's never going to get you out of it. You need to use coordinated control, so rudder and ailerons at the same time, to roll your wings level. And because you're in a spiral dive, you're going to be pointing down like this, assertively pull out of that dive, especially if you're in a glider, trying to use that extra airspeed that you've gained to regain some of your altitude. But you want to make sure that you're getting out of that situation quickly and assertively so that you don't overspeed the aircraft and you don't overstress the aircraft and you don't hit the ground. It means, so the question is, what does it mean by assertively? It doesn't mean use coordinated control to roll the wings level. Okay, great, my wings are level. What's the next thing I do? I'm still dive bombing towards the ground, right? I should probably pull out of the dive. It's going to, because you're diving, there's going to be a lot more force in when you pull back. So like in normal flight, if you wanted to pick up your nose, you might do just a little bit. Oh great, I picked it up. If you're diving down and you're increasing, like don't faff about. Pull that control column. Don't like slam it, but assertively get out of that dive and start using that airspeed that you've accumulated to try and regain some altitude. Does that make sense? Awesome. So you can see in a spin here, the speed is fluctuating, but remains mostly constant, maybe 1.5 to 2 Gs. But in a spiral dive, yes, in a spiral dive, you can definitely get to a point where you're going to overspeed or overload the airframe. That's why you got to stay on top of it. Yeah, I can go back to the spin recovery in a second here after I go over this diagram. So in the spin, you've just lost lift on one of your wings, your stalled condition, you're kind of slowly fluttering down. I like to think of as a spin as if you've ever seen like those maple leaf seeds or whatever they're called, where it's like a flying wing with a single seed and you watch it flutter through the air. That's kind of what a spin looks like from the outside anyways. It doesn't necessarily feel like that when you're in it. But then the spiral dive, you're pointing towards the ground and you're corkscrewing towards the ground. And you're not necessarily spinning around like this. You're just spiraling around towards the ground. Yes, Dennis.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I've guess like can you like I guess I should elaborate more on my question, but because you can get to a point where even if you're super high, you don't care about the ground. It's the kind of thing if you pull out too fast, right? Like if you pull it back on the stick too much, then you'll overload the airframe. But if you do it too slow, then you'll overspeed it. So you get to a point, right, where you wouldn't have any option. You're overstressing the airframe either in overspeed or overloading.
Yes, exactly. So when you actually go on course and you learn the recoveries, you will get taught, I mean, grain of salt. I haven't looked at the instruction manual for this in probably the last 7 years. But I'm fairly certain that one of the parts of the spiral dive recovery is, if necessary, you can open your dive brakes and your spoilers to help bleed off that speed as you pull back. So that's, again, why we were talking about the secondary controls and how they have more than one use, right? So that's why it's important to know all of the controls you have available to you as a pilot and how you can use them in all the different situations you might be in. Does that kind of answer that situation? Awesome. Okay, so to the spin recovery slide, definitely. Types of spins. Yeah, it's just incipient, fully developed, and flat spin. So the incipient spin is basically your wing is dropped. The fully developed spin is you've started spinning around. Excellent. And then spin recovery or drool.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yep.
Sorry, what was the question again?
You had asked to go back to the spin recovery slide.
Yeah, thank you about that, sir.
It's a good thing we did because I missed some instructor notes on this slide. So it's important to note that some aircraft can't recover from spins, especially flat spins. So it's the best recovery is prevention. So try not to get into a spin in the first place. The 233, the glider that we fly, can potentially recover as quickly as a few hundred feet, but the tow aircraft might require several thousand feet in order for the pilot to regain control. So if you're ever going to be practicing any spins or spiral dives or stalls, you should always make sure that you have as much altitude as possible prior to starting those exercises. Because it can turn from an exercise into a real life emergency quickly if you're not paying attention. All right. Anything else on spiral dives that we want to cover before we move on to slips? All right, we'll take that as a no. So, slips. A slip is a deliberate, uncoordinated condition that is used to lose excess height or correct for wind drift on final approach. When used with spoilers, a very high rate of descent is accomplished. The aircraft is usually in a banked attitude, so one wing is lower than the other, and the airspeed indicator will typically not read correctly due to the angle of the pitot tube to the relative airflow. And that will make more sense as we go into some examples here. One thing that I'd like to point out is in the cadet program, we distinguish between forward slips and side slips. I think that you'll find if you go to civilian soaring and possibly even powered aircraft, they don't typically distinguish between the two. They'll just call both of them a slip, which is slightly confusing to somebody who's used to forward versus side slips. But we, in the cadet program, do distinguish between forward and side slips, and we use them for different purposes, and I'll go through them. Yeah. So first, forward slips. We primarily use them to lose altitude, and it's where the longitudinal axis is not aligned with the flight path. So a forward slip, your flight path is going straight ahead. You're going to have your longitudinal axis like this, pointed off to the side, but you're still going like this, and you're going to be having your wing down to maintain your track over the ground straight ahead. So if you had just pointed your longitudinal axis like this, then you would eventually start going in this direction as well. But because you also bank your wing down, you're also sliding through the air like that at the same time and maintaining a forward track over the ground. So the entry to this is you're going to simultaneously bank the aircraft with aileron and applying enough opposite rudder to move the longitudinal axis off the desired track over the ground and away from the downgoing wing. And this is extremely efficient or effective at losing altitude, because you're now basically just drifting through the air, essentially, presenting maximum drag and just sinking like a rock. To recover, you just release the rudder, because it's not really a natural position for it to be locked like this. It's naturally want to turn to straighten out. And you just release the rudder to allow the glider to return to its original heading and level the wings, and then adjust the pitch attitude with the elevator to maintain your desired airspeed. Forward slips are lots of fun. I love doing them. And you'll quite frequently do them in the circuit to maintain your altitude on final. If you like too high, you might use a forward slip as well as spoilers and dive brakes. A side slip, very similar, except you're maintaining a correct heading when there is a crosswind or to move laterally over the ground. Your longitudinal axis in this case is aligned with the flight path. So a forward slip, you're going like this, you're flying sideways through the air like that. In a side slip, you're banked like this. So your longitudinal axis is still pointing where you're going, but you're specifically banked in order to stay tracking over the ground in the same way. So let's say if you had a strong wind coming from here, if you were flying straight and you had this strong wind, you'd see that your wind is actually pushing you over here. So even though you're flying straight, your track over the ground is going to look more like this. If you use a side slip, we'll go over the entry in a second here. Normally, if the air was perfectly calm, your side slip, you would just start moving like this laterally. But because you're now using this side slip to counteract the wind, you're able to stay going perfectly straight. Does that kind of make sense before we dive into the entry? Any questions about visually how that looks, a side slip versus a forward slip? Side slip, forward slip, side slip, forward slip. Well, here's a picture here. You got your forward slip and the side slip, just angled a little bit. So to enter the side slip, just bank the glider and simultaneously apply sufficient opposite rudder to prevent the glider from turning. So normally if you're banking, you're going to get that adverse yaw and then down. But if you control your roll, or if you control your yaw with the rudder at the same time, so you're giving a little bit of right rudder at the same time as banking to the left, you'll actually fly straight, but with your wings tilted down like this. And the amount of bank and rudder that's required is going to depend on either how quickly you want to move laterally or how strong the crosswind is. So another reason why you might want to use a slip is if you're on final approach for, let's say, landing lane 1, and then all of a sudden there's something in landing lane 1 and you need to move over to landing lane 3 to land safely, you can use a slip to do that. So instead of doing like, oh, I'm on final, I'm going to turn and then turn again. Oh, I'm dead because I hit the ground because I lost all my altitude turning. You just do a slip and you just go scoot. I'm on my final approach now. So again, recovery, you just level the wings with your aileron and release the rudder at the rate that will ensure the longitudinal axis does not change. So it's not really something that I can verbally explain exactly the rate to which to do it. It's just something you kind of pick up through muscle memory as you go through the training. It's fairly intuitive once you actually get doing it, and it's a lot of fun. Any questions about the side slips versus the forward slips before I dive into slipping turns, which is going to be the last part of the lesson? Going once. Going twice. 3 times gone. All right. So slipping turns. You use these to lose height while turning. Yeah, recovery for a side slip. We'll go over it real quick. So you did have your bank in like this and your rudder like this so that you continued staying straight. All you have to do is at the same time, you just gradually level the wings and lay off of the rudder at the rate so that if you release if you straighten your wings and don't take off your foot off the rudder at all, you'll just start going like this. If you take your foot off the rudder and don't straighten your wings, you'll just start going like this. So you just do a coordinated movement of both at the same time to go straight. Is that straightforward enough, Dudzinski, or do you need me to explain it any further? Perfect. Okay, slipping turns. We use them to lose height while turning. So the entry can be started from a straight glide, from a coordinated turn, or from a forward slip. And to recover, we just level the wings, release the rudder, and adjust the pitch attitude to maintain the desired airspeed. So normally in a turn, you want to be coordinated. So you want to be, entering your turn, adding your pitch, and your rudder, and being coordinated. Your slipping turn is going to be looking like that's hard to kind of demonstrate. So let's say a coordinated turn looks like this. A slipping turn is going to look like this, where you're actually turning around the point of the low wing, except instead of being, coordinated and elegant about it, you're being like all the way down. And it just really drops you like a rock because you're still turning, but you're presenting yourself at that angle of the forward slip and losing a ton of altitude while doing it. So you would typically use this if, let's say, you're at 800 feet turning base and you just have way too much altitude for where you are in the circuit. Shoot, I'm going to crank open my spoilers and my die brakes. I'm going to make sure I've got the speed for a slipping turn. And I'm just going to dump all of my altitude in this slipping turn as I turn onto base and onto final. And you'll have solved your altitude problem right quick. Let me tell you that much. But yeah, to enter it, you can start it from the straight glide. Just enter that forward slip and start turning just by allowing it to bank more than you're stopping it with the rudder from the coordinated turn. So you could start with the coordinated turn and then just give it some opposite rudder to slam it into the slipping turn, or from a forward slip where you're starting like this and just just easing off the rudder a little bit and getting it into that turn. Whatever way you enter it, recovery is the same. You just level those wings and you release the rudder and adjust the pitch attitude to maintain the desired airspeed. So again, this is something that's more feel-based when you're actually in the aircraft with the hands and feet to figure out how to do it, but it's pretty straightforward to actually pick up. And again, it's a fun thing to do in the glider, in my opinion. But yeah. Any questions about slipping turns before we move on? Going once. Going twice. 3 times gone. Confirmation questions. What are the 3 forms of slips and what are the purposes of each? Hook, can you tell me one?
Me, sir?
Yes. Give me a type of slip and then tell me what you use it for.
We have a forward slip, a side slip, and slipping turns. So a side slip is basically when there's a crosswind, you just basically slip the aircraft longitudinally just to maintain heading. With the crosswind, a side slip is the same thing, and a forward slip is simultaneously banking the glider with the aileron and applying enough opposite rudder to move the longitude axis off the desired track over the ground and away from the downgoing wind. And slipping turns just lose a bunch of height very quickly and can be used to also line up with a runway, for example.
Yeah, if you had to burn a bunch of altitude right at the end of your circuit. Exactly. Another thing that you can use the side slip for is adjusting where you're going to be landing on final if you're not quite in the right spot. Because you never want to do a turn on final, because typically you're established on final at 300 feet, and you do not want to be turning that low to the ground because you're going to run out of altitude before you finish your turn. So you can just use a slip to stay on your final approach, but just move to the left and right as you need to line up for landing. Perfect. Confirmation question number 2. What is the recovery for a spin? Drool, let's go with you.
A recovery for a spin.
We've stalled. We've got our wing drop. We're starting to go into the spin.
Notes here. I've got notes here for recovering from spiral dives, not spins. Yeah, that's okay. So to pull out inputs to roll the wings level to maintain steady flight and assertively pull out of a dive.
So that's the spiral dive. So the recovery from a spin.
I don't have anything for spins.
We've gone into a stall. Our wing has dropped. We want to stop the wing drop as soon as possible with full opposite rudder, and then centralize the control column at the same time, because typically we're pointed up. We want to make sure that we're not pointed up anymore. And then when the rotation has stopped, you centralize the rudder again, and then you pull out of the dive. So spin, first thing to remember with the spin, always full opposite rudder. You're flying along. Oh, my wings dropped. Pick it up. Pick it up with that rudder.
I've got that written down now.
Awesome. Now, what are some characteristics of a spiral dive? Zographos.
Some characteristics might include increase in airspeed, decrease in altitude, and increase in load factor.
Increase in airspeed, decrease in altitude, increase in low speed or load factor. Yep. So a steep descending turn, excessively nose low attitude, excessive angle of bank, excessive load factors, which increase, like we said, rapidly increasing airspeed, rapidly increasing rate of descent, and importantly, that the aircraft is not stalled. Great job. Okay, confirmation number 4. What is the recovery for a spiral dive? Drool.
Recovery for a spiral dive is to use coordinated inputs to roll the wings level and assertively pull out of the dive.
Excellent. And optionally, we didn't talk about it in the lesson that much, but if your speed is increasing rapidly, you can use those other methods available to you, like the spoilers and dive brakes. Excellent. Okay, so that was 405.07. Where did the cover sheet go? spins, spiral dives, and slips. We covered the characteristics of a spin. We talked about the recovery of a spin. We talked about the characteristics of a spiral dive, the recovery of a spiral dive, and the characteristics of a slip. I've been Captain Towers, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions about this class or any of the classes that we covered, or anything related to the Air Cadet Flying Program or the application process or Air Cadets in general. I am open to questions. Apart from that, that was the last bit of the class for tonight.